It was a crisp, early morning when the billionaire, Jonathan Blake, stepped out of his luxury car, a slight frown on his face. He had just wrapped up another high-stakes business deal, one that would secure his place among the richest in the world. The towering skyscraper in the distance mirrored his ambition, tall, sleek, and almost unreachable. But as he walked towards the cafe, where he planned to grab his usual overpriced espresso, something felt different in the air today. It was almost as if the city itself had a secret, a whisper waiting to be heard. As he passed the alleyway beside the cafe, he noticed something unusual. A young boy, no more than 12 or 13, was huddled on the cold pavement, his eyes wide with an odd intensity. The boy wasn't begging, but there was something in his gaze that made Jonathan pause. The boy was staring at him now, and Jonathan felt the weight of those eyes like a burden. Without thinking, Jonathan approached him, as his curiosity got the best of him. "Hey kid, you all right?" he asked, his voice thick with the confidence that came with his wealth. But the boy didn't answer. Instead, his lips parted and he shouted, his voice piercing through the quiet morning air. "Don't eat that!" Jonathan froze, his heart skipping a beat. He wasn't sure if he had heard the words right. He glanced down at the croissant in his hand, the one he'd just picked up from the cafe counter. It was fresh, flaky, the kind of pastry that had always been a symbol of indulgence in his world. But there was something in the boy's desperate tone that made Jonathan hesitate. For a moment he stood there, caught between the worlds he knew so well, the world of wealth and comfort, of endless possibilities, and this strange, haunting moment with a homeless boy who was urging him to stop, to put down the croissant. The boy's ragged clothes were a stark contrast to Jonathan's tailored suit, but it wasn't just his appearance that stood out. It was the look in his eyes, a mix of fear and warning. Something about the boy seemed out of place. Jonathan chuckled nervously, unsure of how to react. "What's wrong with the croissant, kid? You hungry? I could buy you something." But the boy shook his head vigorously. "No, don't eat that," he repeated, his voice growing frantic. Jonathan took a step back, a chill running through him. The boy's eyes flickered to the croissant, then to the street beyond, as if scanning for something. His body trembled, his hands clenched into fists, and Jonathan couldn't help but feel a growing unease. "What's going on? What's the matter with you?" Jonathan asked, his tone less certain now, more wary. The boy's gaze locked onto him again, and for a moment, it was as if time stood still. I can't explain," the boy stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. "But you need to listen to me. You don't know what you're about to do." Jonathan stared at him, bewildered. Here was a homeless child, clearly struggling with something far beyond his age, and yet, the urgency in his voice carried a weight that Jonathan couldn't ignore. The people around them continued with their busy lives, oblivious to this strange exchange. No one seemed to notice the tension building between the two, as if the city itself was holding its breath. "Who are you?" Jonathan finally asked, his curiosity now completely overtaking his confusion. The boy shifted nervously, glancing over his shoulder as if checking for something, or someone watching from a distance. Then with a deep sigh he spoke again. "I'm not who you think I am." Jonathan frowned, his mind racing. What did that mean? What could a homeless boy possibly be hiding? Was this just some strange trick or game to get his attention? He felt his grip tighten on the croissant as he weighed his options. He could easily ignore the boy and continue with his day. After all, who had time for the ramblings of a homeless child? But something in the boy's eyes, that silent plea, made Jonathan pause once more. He glanced at the croissant in his hand, and a sudden thought ran through his mind. What if this wasn't just a random encounter? What if there was something more to it? The boy shifted uneasily on the ground, and Jonathan noticed that he was clutching something tightly in his pocket, though he couldn't tell what it was. His breath was shallow, his face pale, as if he was fighting against an overwhelming fear. "You have to trust me," the boy said, his voice quivering now. "You can't eat it." It's not just food. It's cursed. The word hung in the air, an accusation that Jonathan couldn't understand. Cursed. He looked at the boy, his disbelief growing with each passing second. Jonathan could feel the weight of the moment settling over him. The morning had started like any other, with the simplicity of a routine breakfast. But now, this strange encounter was turning into something far more mysterious. Was the boy mad? Or was he trying to warn him about something far darker? Before he could respond, the boy's eyes darted past him once more and he hissed, "They're coming. You need to leave. Now." Jonathan's heart raced. He turned around quickly, scanning the street behind him, but there was nothing. No one suspicious. No one who looked out of place. Yet the boy's frantic expression told a different story. Jonathan felt a knot form in his stomach, and he looked back down at the croissant in his hand. It was just a pastry, wasn't it? The boy's hand reached out, trembling as if trying to stop him. But Jonathan's mind was already racing, piecing together what little he could understand. He had no idea what was happening, but one thing was clear. He had to make a choice. Eat the croissant or walk away. The silence was deafening as the tension between them hung in the air. Jonathan's fingers hovered over the pastry, his mind torn between disbelief and the boy's urgent warnings. And then, just as he was about to make his decision, a shadow fell over him. A figure emerged from the alley, tall and imposing, moving toward them with a deliberate, almost predatory pace. The boy froze, his face pale with terror. Jonathan's heart skipped a beat. What was happening? "Don't eat it, Mr. Blake," the boy whispered one last time, before everything seemed to spiral into chaos. To be continued. Jonathan's eyes locked onto the shadowy figure approaching from the alley. His heart thudded in his chest, a mix of confusion and unease coursing through him. The figure was tall, almost unnaturally so, with a dark coat that seemed to blend into the surroundings. There was no clear detail, just a silhouette that moved with unsettling calmness, each step deliberate and menacing. The boy's terrified expression deepened as the figure closed the distance. "Who are you?" Jonathan managed to whisper, his voice barely audible over the rising tension. He didn't know if the question was meant for the boy or the looming figure, but it didn't matter. The boy didn't respond, his hands shaking as he clutched his jacket tighter. Jonathan's instincts screamed at him to run, to get away from this strange scene, but his legs felt rooted to the spot, as though the air around him had thickened, frozen in place. The tall figure came to a halt just a few feet away, casting an eerie shadow over the boy and Jonathan. His face remained hidden beneath the collar of his coat, but there was something about the stillness in the way he stood that felt wrong. Jonathan's breath caught in his throat. The boy's voice came out in a barely audible whisper, the words hanging in the air between them like a warning. "You're in danger, Mr. Blake. Please, you need to listen. You can't be here when they arrive." Jonathan tried to process the situation, the cold morning air suddenly feeling much heavier. "What are you talking about? Who's coming?" The tall figure shifted slightly, his presence more imposing now that the boy's warnings had created a strange sense of foreboding. The figure didn't speak. Instead, he reached into the inside pocket of his coat, his movements smooth, calculated. Jonathan's pulse quickened. Was this some kind of attack? Were these two people somehow connected? And if so, why were they targeting him? The boy, still on the ground, trembled visibly. His eyes flicked between the croissant in Jonathan's hand and the figure, as though he knew what would happen if Jonathan made the wrong choice. There was a sudden, strange urgency in the boy's voice when he spoke again. "You have to stop. He's here to..." Before the boy could finish, a sharp metallic sound interrupted them, and Jonathan instinctively stepped back, his hand clutching the croissant a little tighter. He looked down at it for a moment, then back at the figure, who had now pulled out a small object, a black device that Jonathan couldn't immediately recognize. "What is that?" Jonathan asked, his voice shaky despite himself. He was usually in control of every situation, but this felt different. This felt dangerous. The figure didn't answer. Instead, he raised the device, and suddenly, the air around them seemed to crackle with an invisible energy. Jonathan's stomach twisted. The croissant in his hand began to feel heavier, colder, as if something was wrong with it. Something far beyond the simple layers of butter and dough. He looked at the boy, who was now shaking his head vigorously, his eyes wide with terror. "Don't touch it. Don't." Before the boy could finish, the figure pressed a button on the device. The world around Jonathan seemed to distort for a moment, a faint humming noise filling the air. And then everything went silent. Jonathan stood frozen, the croissant still in his hand. But something was different. The atmosphere felt thicker, heavier, like a weight had settled over the street. The shadows around them seemed to stretch unnaturally, creeping along the walls, and for a brief second, Jonathan could have sworn he saw something flicker in the corner of his eye. A movement too fast for him to track. What did you do?" Jonathan managed to ask. His voice barely a whisper. His mind raced. The boy had warned him. The figure had done something. But what? What was happening? The croissant no longer felt like an ordinary pastry. There was something else to it, something that made his skin crawl. The boy, still sitting on the ground, was breathing heavily now, his face pale. "You don't understand," he said, his voice barely audible. "It's not just food. It's a signal. A trigger." Jonathan furrowed his brow, the weight of the boy's words sinking in. A trigger? For what? His mind scrambled for answers. This wasn't just a random encounter. It wasn't a trick. Something deeper was at play here, something far beyond the world he knew. The tall figure finally spoke, his voice cold like the wind in winter. "You shouldn't have gotten involved, Mr. Blake. But now that you have, there's no turning back." Jonathan's breath hitched. "What do you mean?" The figure didn't respond immediately. Instead, he turned his gaze to the boy, who had lowered his head, almost as if he were giving in to something invisible. The boy's hands clenched tightly into fists, his knuckles white against the cold pavement. He didn't speak, but there was a faint look of resignation in his eyes. Like he knew this moment was inevitable. Jonathan's pulse quickened. What was this? What was going on? The figure seemed to notice Jonathan's growing confusion. With a slow, deliberate motion, he reached into the pocket of his coat and pulled out something small, a blackened, chipped coin. It shimmered slightly in the dim light of the alley as he held it between his fingers. Jonathan's breath caught in his throat. He couldn't explain it, but there was something about the coin that felt wrong, like it was out of place in this world. The figure extended his arm, offering the coin to Jonathan. "Take it. It's yours now. But you won't understand until it's too late." Jonathan's mind raced. The boy had warned him. The figure's cryptic words made his skin crawl. But there was something about the way the coin gleamed, the way the figure's hand trembled ever so slightly, that made him hesitate. Something about the boy's presence, about the strange sense of urgency that seemed to hang in the air, kept him rooted to the spot. The boy's voice trembled as he spoke again, his words heavy with fear. "It's not just the food. It's everything. They'll come for you. They'll find you no matter where you go." The coin in the figure's hand glinted in the dim light again, drawing Jonathan's gaze. He could feel his heart pounding, his palms sweating. This was no longer a random encounter. This was something much bigger. And now he was involved. He had no choice but to face whatever dark path this strange, eerie moment had set him on. Before Jonathan could make a decision, the boy suddenly cried out, "Run! Get out of here, Mr. Blake. They're already coming." Jonathan's head snapped around, but there was nothing. Nothing but the empty street. The figure, the boy, the croissant, everything seemed suspended in time. The weight of the boy's words pressed against him, and just as he began to move, a sound filled the air. Faint, distant at first, but growing louder. Low hum. Almost like an engine revving up, the ground itself trembling in response. Jonathan looked back at the boy, whose face had gone completely pale, the terror in his eyes now matching Jonathan's own. "You don't have much time," the boy whispered, barely audible. And then, without warning, everything went black. Jonathan's mind raced as everything around him plunged into darkness. The sharp hum of the strange engine seemed to vibrate through his bones, rattling him to his core. His eyes struggled to adjust, but no matter how hard he focused, there was only an overwhelming, suffocating blackness. Panic set in. He couldn't see. He couldn't move. It felt like time itself had stopped. Then, just as abruptly as the darkness had fallen, light flickered into existence, but it was cold, harsh, and unwelcoming. Jonathan blinked, his vision blurry at first. Slowly, shapes began to materialize around him. He was still standing in the alley, but now everything looked different. The street, once familiar, was now distorted, like an old photograph faded by time. The shadows stretched unnaturally long, and the air was thick, almost suffocating. "What the hell is happening?" Jonathan whispered, his voice sounding strange to his own ears. The boy, the figure, the croissant, it all felt like a dream now, something that couldn't possibly be real. But deep down, Jonathan knew it wasn't a dream. The sense of dread that hung in the air, that weight in his chest, was too real. He looked around, trying to make sense of the situation. The figure was gone. The boy was gone. All that remained were the eerie shadows and the unsettling quiet. But there was something else, something more subtle but just as disturbing. The hum. It was still there, faint but growing louder, as if it were coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. Jonathan took a hesitant step forward, his feet dragging against the pavement. As he walked, the distorted buildings around him seemed to bend and twist, like the world itself was shifting. He had no idea where to go, no idea how to get out of this place. All he could do was move, one slow step at a time, his mind scrambling for answers. But then a voice broke through the silence. It wasn't the boy's voice, nor the figure's, but something different. Low and gravelly, yet unmistakably real. "You shouldn't have taken the coin." Jonathan froze, his heart skipping a beat. He spun around, trying to locate the source of the voice, but there was no one there. The alley was empty, just as it had been before. His breath came in shallow gasps, and the tension in his muscles only deepened. Who was speaking? Where were they? The voice came again, this time closer, as if it were echoing in his very mind. "It's too late now. You've made your choice." Jonathan's eyes darted around wildly, but still there was no sign of anyone. Just the haunting presence of the shifting shadows and the growing hum. The voice seemed to be everywhere, in the air, in his thoughts, in the very core of his being. "I didn't ask for this," Jonathan muttered to himself, his voice trembling. "I don't understand. I don't even know what's going on." The voice didn't answer directly. Instead, it spoke in cryptic fragments like a riddle. "The coin is a key, signal, beacon. Once it's given, it can never be taken back." The words felt heavy, laden with an ancient knowledge that Jonathan couldn't grasp. Suddenly, the air around him grew colder. A chill ran down his spine, and the hum intensified, vibrating through the ground beneath him. He could feel it now, a presence, watching him, moving closer with every passing second. Jonathan looked down at his hand, where the croissant still sat, untouched. He had forgotten about it in the chaos of the moment. But now, the flaky pastry seemed to glow faintly in the dim light, as if it were part of this bizarre reality he found himself in. The boy's warning echoed in his mind. It's a signal. Trigger. But a trigger for what? And why had he been the one to receive it? A rustling sound broke his thoughts, and he whipped around, his pulse quickening. There, at the far end of the alley, a figure stepped into view. This time, it wasn't the tall, imposing man from before. It was something different, something older and far more unsettling. The figure moved with the same slow, deliberate steps, but there was a certain fluidity to it, as if it were gliding, not walking. Jonathan's breath caught in his throat as the figure drew closer. Its face was obscured by a hood, its body draped in tattered robes that seemed to blend into the shadows, but Jonathan could feel its eyes on him. Deep, dark eyes, full of knowledge and ancient power. "You're playing a dangerous game, Mr. Blake," the figure said, its voice soft, yet carrying a weight that seemed to press down on Jonathan's chest. "The coin marks you. And once you're marked, there is no escape." Jonathan stumbled backward, his mind racing to piece together the fragments of the conversation he had overheard. The boy's warning. The strange figure with the device. Coin. Everything was connected. But how? And why him? The figure stepped closer, its presence growing more oppressive with every movement. Jonathan's hands clenched into fists, his grip still tight around the croissant. The pastry suddenly felt like a burden, something far heavier than it should have been. "Why are you doing this?" Jonathan demanded, his voice cracking. "What do you want from me?" The figure paused for a moment, as if considering the question. Then it answered, its words slow and deliberate. "You are not meant to be here. But now that you are, we cannot let you go. You are a part of something much bigger, something that stretches far beyond the limits of your world." Jonathan's head spun as the figure's words sunk in. He had always lived in the comfort of his wealth, his success, his carefully structured life. But now, everything he had known felt like a lie. This wasn't just some random encounter. This wasn't a chance meeting with a homeless boy and a mysterious figure. This was a trap, and he had walked right into it. "You've been marked, Mr. Blake," the figure continued, its voice growing colder. "And now you must play your part." Jonathan took another step back, his mind a blur. "What part? What are you talking about?" The figure raised its hand slowly, revealing a small, glinting object, the same coin Jonathan had seen earlier. "The coin is only the beginning," it said. "It will guide you whether you want it to or not." Just as Jonathan was about to ask more, a sudden gust of wind swept through the alley, carrying with it the faintest whisper. "Run!" It was the boy's voice. Desperate. Urgent. The figure turned sharply, as if startled, but Jonathan couldn't see anyone else. The warning hung in the air, and something deep inside him knew it was time to act. Without thinking, he bolted. His legs moved before his brain could process the decision. He didn't know where he was going, but he knew he couldn't stay there any longer. The figure's voice followed him, distant but still clear. "You can't outrun fate, Mr. Blake." The hum grew louder, the ground trembling beneath his feet. Jonathan's heart raced as he sprinted down the alley, the coin still clutched tightly in his hand. The boy's warning echoed in his mind. Was it too late? Could he escape? Or was this the beginning of something far darker than he had ever imagined? Jonathan's legs burned as he sprinted through the alley, the cold night air stinging his skin, but it wasn't enough to quell the fear pulsing through his veins. Every step he took felt like it could be his last. The voice, the boy's desperate warning, the ominous tone of the figure, all of it played in his mind like an unrelenting drumbeat, urging him forward, yet trapping him in this endless maze of uncertainty. He didn't know where he was running anymore. The alley had transformed, stretching and contorting around him like a living thing. The walls seemed to close in, the ground beneath him quaking as though the very earth itself was shaking under some immense, invisible pressure. Each turn he made felt like a trap, each shadow he passed a potential danger. And all the while, that hum, that unsettling noise, grew louder and louder, wrapping around him like an invisible chain. Was this really happening? His breath came in ragged gasps as he pushed himself harder, trying to break free of the creeping dread that clung to him like a second skin. His fingers tightened around the coin, the cold metal now seeming to pulse with a strange, foreign energy. It felt as though it were alive, as if it were calling to him, pulling him in deeper, no matter how hard he tried to resist. Suddenly, the alley opened up into a clearing, and for a moment, Jonathan thought he might have escaped. He stumbled into a dimly lit street, the kind he knew well, the city streets, bustling with life during the day but eerily quiet at night. His body screamed for him to stop, to catch his breath, but he couldn't. He couldn't let his guard down. Not now. Not when he had no idea who or what was chasing him. Then he saw them. A group of figures, standing motionless at the far end of the street. They were draped in dark clothing, their faces hidden beneath hoods. There were 6 of them, all standing in a perfect line, unmoving, their presence somehow colder than the night air around them. Jonathan's heart skipped a beat as he recognized the same unsettling aura from the tall figure and the robed man. This was no coincidence. They were part of the same. Whatever this was. One of them stepped forward. Jonathan's breath caught in his throat. It was the figure he had seen earlier, the one with the strange device. But now he wasn't alone. The others flanked him, their eyes glowing faintly from beneath their hoods. Jonathan instinctively took a step back, his body going rigid. "Why are you doing this?" Jonathan shouted, his voice hoarse, filled with desperation. "What do you want from me?" The figure with the device stepped forward, his gaze sharp, as if he had been expecting this moment. "We don't want anything from you, Mr. Blake," he said, his voice cold and detached. "You've already given us what we need." Jonathan's pulse raced as he clutched the coin tighter. He could feel it vibrating in his hand now, almost like it was resonating with the tension in the air. The figure raised his hand slowly, and the rest of the group followed suit, each of them lifting their hands in unison. "Where is it?" the figure demanded. "The signal. The key." Jonathan's stomach twisted. "A signal. Key." He wasn't sure what it meant, but he knew instinctively that it had something to do with the croissant, the coin, and the boy's warning. But how did they know about it? Why were they after him? "I don't have it," Jonathan lied, but the words felt hollow, even to him. He could still feel the cold weight of the croissant in his pocket, the small coin pressing against his skin. They knew. The figure's eyes narrowed, and he stepped even closer. "Don't play games, Mr. Blake. We know you have it. We know you're marked." Jonathan's breath quickened. "Marked? Once you took the coin," the figure continued, "you became part of something much greater than yourself. The coin is not just a token, it's a bond, a connection to something ancient. And now you are its key." Jonathan's mind raced, but the words didn't make sense. He tried to think, to piece together what had been happening, but the more he tried, the more the world around him seemed to warp. The street before him began to stretch again, the air growing heavier, colder. The hum intensified, vibrating through his chest like the beating of a drum. The figures in front of him moved closer, their shadows distorting, twisting into grotesque shapes. Something wasn't right. He glanced around, trying to find some escape, some way out of this nightmare. But the alleyways seemed endless, stretching into the dark void that now surrounded him. The group of figures closed in, their movements synchronized, as if they were part of a single entity. "You don't understand, do you, Mr. Blake?" the figure with the device said, his voice now carrying an edge of impatience. "This isn't about what you want. It's about what's already been set in motion." Jonathan took another step back, his mind racing. He had no idea what this man was talking about, but the terror in his chest told him it didn't matter. All that mattered was survival. He wasn't going to let them take him, not without a fight. He turned and bolted down the street, heart pounding, the coin clutched tightly in his hand. The figures didn't chase him immediately, but their presence loomed behind him, an oppressive force that seemed to follow his every move. He could hear their steps, echoing behind him, just out of sight, as if they were waiting for him to tire, waiting for him to break. The further he ran, the more the world around him seemed to twist and shift. He no longer recognized the streets he had once known so well. The buildings were no longer just buildings. They had become something else, twisted, warped, like they were alive, closing in on him. The shadows grew deeper, darker, the hum filling his ears until it became unbearable. His thoughts were scattered, his vision blurred. Every time he looked behind him, the figures were closer, moving with unnerving speed. Suddenly, he felt a hand grab his arm, yanking him back. He spun around, ready to fight, but froze when he saw the boy standing in front of him. "You need to stop running," the boy said, his face pale, his eyes wide with fear. "It's not enough. They won't stop. You have to face it. You have to face them." Jonathan shook his head, disoriented, the adrenaline coursing through him. "I don't understand. What do you mean? What's happening?" The boy's gaze turned grim. "You're not the one they want, Mr. Blake. You're just a part of the game. But you're the only one who can change it." Before Jonathan could respond, the ground trembled beneath them, and the figures emerged from the shadows. The leader raised his hand, his expression cold and resolute. "You've run far enough, Mr. Blake. It's time to end this." And just like that, everything went silent. The boy grabbed Jonathan's hand, his grip tight. "You have to make a choice," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Now, before it's too late." The hum grew deafening, and Jonathan's world tilted. Everything hung in the balance. The choice was his. But time was running out. The boy's grip on Jonathan's hand tightened, and in that moment, it felt like the world itself had gone still. The figures behind them moved, but it was as if they were in slow motion, their forms warped and blurry as if they were mere shadows in the corner of Jonathan's vision. The hum that had been vibrating the air now stilled, leaving an eerie silence that weighed on his chest like a leaden burden. Jonathan's breath was ragged, his pulse thumping in his ears, but he knew he couldn't keep running forever. The boy's voice was barely a whisper, but it rang clear in Jonathan's mind. "You have to choose. Now." Jonathan looked down at the croissant still clutched in his other hand. The coin inside. Boy. The figures. Everything had been leading to this moment, and yet it still didn't make sense. He had no idea what kind of game this was, but he could feel the gravity of it pressing down on him. It was more than just survival now, it was about fate, something far bigger than himself. "I don't know what to do," Jonathan said, his voice trembling. He wanted to pull away, to escape from this nightmare. But something kept him there, rooted to the spot. The boy's eyes locked onto his, intense and filled with a sorrow that made Jonathan's heart ache. "You have to trust me. You're the key to ending this, to breaking the cycle. The coin, it's not just a symbol. It's the anchor." The boy's words made Jonathan's head spin. The anchor? For what? What was this cycle? Who were these people? What did they want from him? The leader of the figures stepped forward, his voice booming now, commanding the space around them. "Enough games, Mr. Blake. You don't understand, but you will." He raised his hand, and instantly, the ground beneath Jonathan's feet seemed to crack open, the darkness swirling like a vortex, pulling at him. Jonathan felt himself being sucked into the void, his legs buckling as the weight of it pressed down on him. He looked at the boy, who was still gripping his hand, his face twisted in agony. "Trust me, Jonathan," the boy said urgently, his voice nearly drowned out by the swirling chaos. "The coin is your choice. The choice to end this. To stop it before they can use you." Jonathan's mind spun as he fought against the pull. What choice? What was the coin supposed to do? The figures in front of him were closing in, their eyes glowing with a sinister light. They were waiting. For what? For him to make the decision. It was then that something shifted in Jonathan's mind. The fog began to clear. He remembered the boy's words earlier. "You've already given us what we need." Click. Coin. It wasn't just a key. It was a choice. The choice to break the cycle, to stop the figures from using him as a pawn in their twisted game. He wasn't the key to their power. He was the key to their destruction. And it was in his hands all along. With a burst of clarity, Jonathan reached into his pocket, pulling out the coin. It glowed faintly, pulsing with energy like it was alive. He looked at the boy, who nodded, his expression a mixture of hope and fear. Jonathan held the coin up, feeling its weight shift from a burden to a weapon. He didn't know what it would do, but he knew it was time to stop running. He turned toward the leader, the figure who had been orchestrating everything, and in a voice that trembled with both fear and determination, he said, "This ends now." The leader's eyes narrowed, and for the briefest moment, Jonathan saw something flicker, something like recognition or maybe even fear. The ground beneath them shuddered, and a wind began to whip around them, but Jonathan stood firm, the coin held high. Suddenly, a blinding flash of light erupted from the coin, radiating outward in a wave of energy that pushed the figures back. The light filled the street, the alley, the entire city, until it seemed like the very air was vibrating with power. Jonathan shielded his eyes from the intense glow, but he could feel it, the weight of the power surging through him, through everything. The figures stumbled backward, their hands raised to shield themselves from the blinding light. The leader's eyes went wide, and his lips parted in what could have been a shout, but it was lost in the roar of the light. The boy, still gripping Jonathan's hand, looked up at him, his face filled with awe. "You did it," the boy said, his voice full of disbelief. "You stopped it." But Jonathan wasn't sure. He wasn't sure until he saw it. In the midst of the light, a shadow appeared. Darker than the night around them, a figure materialized. But it wasn't one of the robed figures. This one was different. It was tall, cloaked in a black robe that seemed to shimmer with an unnatural energy. Its face was obscured by a hood, but its presence was unmistakable. This was the source. The one who had been orchestrating everything from the very beginning. The boy's grip on Jonathan tightened, fear flashing across his face. "It's him." The figure stepped forward, its presence suffocating, like the air itself was bending to its will. "You think you can stop me?" The voice was deep, resonating with an unnatural power that sent chills down Jonathan's spine. Jonathan's heart raced, but the coin in his hand thrummed with energy, as if answering the challenge. The light that had been surging around them now concentrated in Jonathan's palm, the glow almost blinding. "You don't have to fight me," the figure said, its tone chillingly calm. "You are nothing but a pawn in this game. You have always been." Jonathan's fingers tightened around the coin, and in that moment, he realized something. The coin wasn't just about breaking the cycle. It was about choosing to break free, to stop being a pawn, to take control. "No," Jonathan whispered, his voice growing stronger. "I'm not your pawn." And with that he made his choice. The light erupted one final time, this time stronger than before, engulfing everything in its path. The figure let out a horrible screech, its form disintegrating in the light. The boy beside Jonathan smiled, his face filled with something like relief. The light began to fade, and slowly, the world around Jonathan returned to normal. The alley was no longer twisted. The figures were gone. The city streets were still. The boy, his face now calm, looked at Jonathan with a mixture of gratitude and sadness. "You did it," he said quietly, his voice barely a whisper. "You broke the cycle." But Jonathan, still reeling from the overwhelming energy, didn't respond. He looked at the coin, now dim in his hand, and wondered if it had truly ended or if something else was waiting in the wings. And just as he was about to ask the boy what came next, the boy's face changed. His smile slipping, replaced by a look of something darker. "I'm sorry," the boy said, and before Jonathan could react, the world around him went black once again. The end. Or was it just the beginning? The world around Jonathan fell into a suffocating pitch-black void, leaving him disoriented, his heart hammering in his chest. He felt weightless, as if suspended in mid-air, drifting through nothingness. The boy's voice, once so full of urgency and certainty, had faded to nothing. His last words echoed in Jonathan's mind, but they held no comfort now. "I'm sorry." Time seemed to stretch, as though it had stopped entirely. Jonathan couldn't tell if he was still awake or lost in some dreamlike state. His thoughts scrambled, trying to piece together what had happened, what was real and what wasn't. The coin had done something that had driven back the figures, stopped the cycle, or so he thought. But the boy's cryptic final words haunted him, suggesting there was still more to this strange puzzle than he understood. And then, just as suddenly as it had all begun, light flickered in the distance. Soft, warm, like the glow of the first light of dawn breaking through a long, dark night. Jonathan's senses sharpened. He wasn't sure if he was waking up or if this was another illusion, but the pull of the light was undeniable. With a deep breath, he pushed himself forward, reaching out toward it. Slowly, the darkness around him began to fade, and the world came back into focus. He found himself standing in the same street he'd been on just moments before. The city stretched out in front of him, bathed in the soft golden light of early morning. The alleyways were quiet again, the shadows no longer oppressive but familiar, even peaceful. It felt like nothing had changed, yet everything had. He looked down at his hand, still holding the coin, but now it was just a simple worn piece of metal. The glow was gone, its power seemingly drained. He let out a sigh of relief, but his heart still raced with questions. Then he saw her. The woman who had been part of this strange, twisted journey all along. She stood across the street, looking almost out of place against the backdrop of normalcy. She was smiling, but there was something different in her expression. No longer the person she had seemed to be earlier. No longer just an observer. Now, there was something purposeful about her presence. "Jonathan," she called gently, her voice soft but sure. "You made it." He stood frozen for a moment, unsure how to respond. The woman had been a mystery, someone caught up in the web of this strange story, yet somehow untouched by the chaos. But now, seeing her there, standing in the quiet of the morning, he realized how much he had relied on her throughout this journey. She had been a constant when everything else had been in flux. "How?" was all Jonathan could manage to say. She stepped forward, her eyes warm, no longer filled with the cryptic distance they had carried before. "Because you were always meant to," she said. "You were never just a pawn. You were the one who could choose, the one who could change the story." Jonathan's confusion deepened. "Change the story? How?" The woman nodded slowly, as if she had been waiting for him to understand. "You broke the cycle, Jonathan. You ended the game they had set in motion." She looked down at the coin in his hand. "But what you don't realize yet is that it wasn't just about stopping them. It was about giving you the power to choose your own path." Jonathan stared at the coin, the weight of her words sinking in. Power to choose. That's what he'd been given. Not a simple escape from the figures or the mystery that surrounded him, but the chance to reclaim his life, to take control of his destiny. No longer bound by the forces that had manipulated him. No longer trapped by a fate that was never his to begin with. "Oh, I'm free?" Jonathan asked, the words tasting strange on his tongue. "It's really over." The woman smiled. "Yes, Jonathan. You are free. But freedom isn't always as simple as it sounds." He frowned. "What do you mean?" "The road ahead won't be easy," she said, her voice thoughtful, almost distant. "The choices you made didn't just break the cycle. They have consequences. The figures you defeated were part of a larger system, an ancient power that will try to regain control, even if you don't see them. There will always be forces trying to steer you in a direction you don't want to go." Jonathan felt a chill run down his spine. "So, it's never really over?" The woman shook her head. "No, it's not. But you now have the freedom to shape your own future. The choices are yours. And that is something no one can take from you." Jonathan looked around at the peaceful morning, the bustling city, the ordinary life that stretched out before him. For the first time he felt a sense of clarity. The fear that had held him captive for so long had dissolved. He wasn't the man caught in a strange game anymore. He was Jonathan Blake, a person with a life ahead of him, a life that he would control. "What happens now?" Jonathan asked quietly, almost to himself. The woman's smile softened. "Now you live. You move forward. The choices you make from here on out will be your own. That's the real power you hold." Jonathan nodded, the weight of it all settling in. For so long he had been running from the figures, from the unknown, from the things he didn't understand. But now, with the coin still in his hand, He understood that he wasn't running anymore. He wasn't trying to escape anything. He was free to move forward, to make his own choices, to write his own story. "I think I'm ready," Jonathan said, his voice filled with quiet determination. The woman gave him one last nod, and as if she had never been there at all, she faded into the crowd of the city. Jonathan stood alone, but it didn't feel like isolation. Felt like the beginning of something new. And as he turned to walk down the street, the warmth of the morning sun washing over him, he felt a sense of peace, not just because the danger was over, but because he had finally taken control. The power was his now. The story was his to write. Whatever came next, he knew that he could face it. The world felt open, full of possibility, and for the first time in a long time, Jonathan Blake believed in the future. And somewhere, deep within, he felt a flicker of understanding, that this story wasn't just his. It was everyone's story. The story of breaking free from the chains that bound us all, of choosing our path, and of facing whatever comes next with courage. The end. Or perhaps just the beginning.